There's a tweet I read a whole while back, and it was a pretty simple one sentence tweet. And it said, every person has their vices. Every person has their things that they are afflicted by. Every person has things they are susceptible to. It might be different from one guy to the next guy, but every person has an Achilles heel, right? No one is perfect. No matter how perfect they seem on the outside, every person has an Achilles heel, and it's just simply the way that God designed the universe, right? So in the Bible, it really mentions the seven deadly sins, right? Now, the seven deadly sins are not all the sins that exist in the world. The seven deadly sins represent a classification of vices, right? Where basically you have almost everything that could be considered negative that could bring you bad karma, that you can be negative afflicted by, that could send you into a downward spiral, that can be classified most of the time into these seven categories, right? These seven vices, these seven deadly sins that almost every vice or sin that someone is consistently afflicted by can be fitted into one of these seven categories. Now, the first category of the seven deadly sins is pride, right? Pride, also known as, the hubris of the defeated. Pride comes before the fall. That's basically what the hubris of the defeated means, where before someone falls, before someone is defeated, sometimes they have this excessive arrogance, this excessive confidence. It's like the Dunning-Kruger curve, where you got somebody who never played baseball before, and they watched a couple baseball players on TV, and they say, "Oh, that looks easy. I'm gonna go ahead and pick a baseball bat. How hard can it be?" And then when you're sitting behind home plate and you get a ball thrown at you at 90 miles per hour, you're like, there's no possible way that there's a human that exists that can hit a ball at 90 miles per hour. Trust me, I've seen it, and it just goes too fast. And you're like, wow, these guys on TV are actually superbly talented. They just make it look easy, right? It's like that Dunning Kruger where the guys refuse to acknowledge that they could possibly be incorrect, that they could possibly be wrong. They're moving on a straight path, but they're not moving like water. They're too rigid. So when you're moving too rigid, you're coming across mountains, you're coming across rocks, you have trouble, you're kind of bouncing all over the place. You're not moving like water. As Bruce Lee used to say, move like water. That doesn't mean you should kind of mold yourself to anything. It means you should have the humbleness to say, hey, I may not be right about everything. Hey, I may not have everything figured out. And I'm going to go ahead and be humble enough where I'm open to changing my mind on things. I'm open to changing my direction. I'm going to keep an open mind as I move throughout life, right? This is one of the seven deadly sins, also known as pride, also known as arrogance, also known as hubris, right? Now, the second of the deadly sins is greed, and this is a really common one, right? If you have $1 million saved up in the bank, do you really need 10 million? Do you really need 100 million? There's a lot of guys out there like that, you know, in these online schools, online academies that say, hey, I'm gonna go ahead and do the SMMA. I'm gonna do the drop shipping. Hey, I already made 100,000 liquid monthly. I'm bringing that in. Let's go to 1 mil. And I see these guys who have this obsession with money, right? And they're just so attached to the money so much that they just that's all they focus on. And then eventually they become so in love with money that they begin to use money as a band aid for all their problems, right? And it simply doesn't work, right? If you're wealthy and you're using money to solve all your problems, then you're going to start using money to solve all your issues with girls. All right, it might get you some results, but you're going to miss out on the personal development thing. You're going to miss out on the key things that money can't fix that you're supposed to develop to get good at that, right? If you use money to hire some kind of health coach, health influencer, you're going to get his view, his advice. He may not have all the answers, though, and he may be wrong about stuff himself. And that's the problem with following anyone too strictly. You get everything about their viewpoint. You have to acknowledge that not everyone may be right about everything. And a lot of times you might have to figure a lot of this stuff yourself out. Or once again, be like water, right? Not move too rigid, right? Greed is the second deadly sin, right? That a lot of people are afflicted by. The love of collecting material wealth or earthly goods, the physical goods that deteriorate. A lot of people sacrifice their soul growth, their spiritual growth, in order for their love of material goods that is not immortal, that does not last forever, but your soul and spiritual growth does. Third one is also very common, which is known as lust. There's no need to explain this one. This is an envy for pleasure, right? And some guys drive themselves crazy for this, right? We're all human beings. We all have natural physical desires. We all experience the mood for things at a certain point. But what this basically represents is you're unable to function because you're too afflicted by this thing, right? A lot of guys, when they meet women, or especially when they're trying to have fun experiences, they can't think deeper than the primal level, right? The primal level is like snakes and reptiles, and they say that snakes and lizards, I'm not sure if this is true, but their brains only function for like their basic primal goods, which is like food and starting a family and stuff like that. And I'm sure animals are conscious and smart, but animals are not as conscious as humans, and they're not able to do as much as humans do naturally, right? So, as you can see, a lot of guys are unable to kind of meet people and speak to people deeper than the surface level because they're too busy thinking about this end goal, this reward state. They're too busy thinking about the reward state. In almost everything in life, the reward state comes after you've earned it, after you've done the work state. It's work reward, risk reward. It's you've gone through something and you've earned the reward, right? You can try to skip the work and get the reward, but on a long enough time frame, it just doesn't work. You know, people work, they get the reward, they take the risk, they get the reward, they invest, and they get the reward, right? And that's pretty much what it is. A lot of guys need to exit themselves out of just going after this final state, which is just a physical pleasure. And you have to acknowledge that, you know, your physical desires, but you also have to acknowledge that you kind of have to go through what every guy goes through and actually work to earn it. That is how the universe works. That is how there is work and fun. There is balance throughout the universe. There is yin and yang. There is not simply yang. You know what I mean? So that is the third deadly sin. The fourth deadly sin is also known as envy or jealousy. Right? This one you can see all throughout the world, right? And this one, a lot of people can be negatively affected by, right? Some people, when they think about jealousy or envy, they think about, do I get jealous of other people when I see a guy collecting money? No, it can be more common than that, right? It can be more common than that. I'll give you a second common example that a lot of people don't think about, that I see a lot of people get afflicted by. Sometimes you have a guy or a girl who, you know, they got someone who's really attractive in their high school and they see that person get all the results and they're like, oh, what's the point of me trying if this person has everything on a silver platter? And a lot of these people, they'll get mad at the world when they see a kid that grew up with like rich parents that went to a prep school or had everything in life seemingly handed to them on a silver platter. And it's like, okay, my genetics, there's nothing I could do. This person outmatches me. It goes much deeper than I'm jealous of a person, I'm envious of a person. Jealousy and envy can create mind states where you become a lot less secure about yourself, or you don't find the reason to move on, or you're too busy to think about what another person has, and you don't spend enough time and energy focusing on your internal development, which is really what's going to stick with you and what's really going to matter, right? So that is what basically envy is, right? People that are susceptible to envy. That is the fourth deadly sin. Now, The fifth deadly sin, the fifth vice, is gluttony, which is overindulgence, excessive consumption, right? Some people interpret this as people that eat too much food, drink too much drink, right? And gluttony can be described as that, right? Gluttony can also be described as you're not maintaining the balance, right? So there's a lot of people who are gluttonous about having fun. They want to have all the fun, but they don't want to work. And life just simply doesn't work like that. There must be some type of balance that has to be maintained. If you have too much fun, you might feel the urge to start working, right? This is how the world works. If you work too much, you're going to feel a sudden urge to have fun, to get some kind of release, right? And this has to do with personal development. Gluttony is I'm overindulging, I'm over consuming, I'm knocking off the balance that the universe requires, right? If I'm eating a lot of food, I have to remember to work out and to run, right? I feel the urge to eat a lot of food, but I'm pretty responsible with keeping myself in shape and staying active. Maybe I could be more responsible with it, but for the most part, gluttony is I'm overindulging in something without keeping the necessary balance, in which case the balance is upset, right? So that is the fifth deadly sin. Now, the sixth deadly sin also tends to be pretty common, and that is wrath. Wrath is revenge, vengeance, right? You know, People that, hey, this guy did something to me, I'm going to have to get them back, right? Someone did something to me, I'm going to have to say something back, right? How many news stories you hear of on the news, right, of something happening to a guy and the thing wasn't premeditated? How many news stories you read of the news where two guys were walking down the street, one guy said something to another guy as a joke, they start fighting, something happens? Or road rage incidents, right, where someone kind of lost themselves or became seriously injured because one guy cut them off at an intersection. It really is that simple, right? When if you're always reacting and you're always engaging yourself in wrath, right, and revenge and immersing yourself in vengeance, you have the ability to protect yourself. You should absolutely protect yourself from threats. But if you're always focused on getting revenge, seeking vengeance on people, it will eventually destroy yourself. Eventually, you're going to come across someone who is seeking revenge and vengeance on you. You're going to come across someone who you kind of said something to them, they said something back, you don't want to let it go, and you think the person's going to give up, and they don't want to let it go, and they think you're going to give up. Eventually, you're going to waste a lot of time immersing yourself in something that is not productive. And if it's getting worse, eventually you are going to come across a person that really doesn't care about doing something. And it may not end that well for you. You got to have the ability to let things go. You got to have the mindset where it's not the end of the world, where if I didn't get this guy back, maybe I can forgive, right? Jesus forgave when he was on the cross. He forgave the people that did it to him, and he had lost his life for it. He forgave the people that do it to him. That was one of his final words, that he was going to forgive for people who had persecuted him for seemingly no reason, right? It's not easy to do, especially if you're not used to it, right? But eventually you have to acknowledge that it doesn't help you and it can possibly destroy you if you leave these feelings unchecked. And if your whole uh mindset on this world is to survive and thrive, you realize you can live without necessarily seeking revenge on everyone who has possibly done something to you. Right? That is six. Deadly sin number six. Now, the last, but certainly not least, is deadly sin number seven, which is sloth, also known as laziness, failure, or apathy, right? There's a lot of people in life where they say, I'm not an evil person, right? I'm not doing anything to anyone, but they're sitting on the couch watching TV all day. They're not taking action. They're not doing more to help people. They're not doing more to improve the state of the world, right? That is not how the world is intended, right? They say something like the sun has a lifespan of like 14 billion years. Well, there's some day in the distant future where the sun may not work anymore. Don't you think it's a wise idea for humanity to advance themselves in the age of space exploration?